had been, quote, entirely laid open. The intestines had been, quote, lifted out of the body and placed by the shoulder of the corpse. The body was then conveyed to the mortuary, while Inspector Chandler and Dr. Phillips conducted a sweep of the backyard. Most of what they found belonged to the tenants of the building, but just below the resting place of the woman's feet, they found a small piece of cloth and 2 combs. The items had likely belonged to the victim, but it seemed to Dr. Phillips that they had been deliberately positioned and arranged by the killer. The post-mortem revealed that 2 brass rings had been forcefully removed from the victim's left hand. These rings were nowhere to be found. Portions of the victim's abdomen had also gone missing, including the womb. Dr. Phillips believed that, quote, the mode in which these portions were extracted shows an anatomical knowledge. This point was greatly expanded upon at the subsequent inquest. The injuries had been made by someone who had considerable anatomical skill and knowledge. There were no meaningless cuts. For instance, no mere slaughter of animals could have carried out these operations. It must have been someone accustomed to this movement. The victim was quickly identified as Annie Chapman. Chapman's date of birth is a bit uncertain, but she was roughly 47 at the time of her death. She had at least 7 children, but was tragically only survived by 2. Her last known address was a common lodging house at 35 Dorset Street. On the night of her death, Chapman had been denied accommodations as she lacked the funds to pay for a bed. She was escorted off the premises by the night watchman, who then saw her vanish into a nearby alleyway. What happened to Chapman over the next few hours, nobody knows. Her whereabouts during this time is a complete mystery. But unlike the 2 previous cases, a witness in the Chapman case might have caught a glimpse of the killer. At 5:30 on the morning of September the 8th, a woman named Elizabeth Long spotted a man and a woman conversing outside 29 Hanbury Street. Long was positive that the woman she'd seen was Annie Chapman, but the man had stood with his back towards her, so he never saw his face. Long did, however, manage to overhear a fragment of their conversation. The man had posed the question, "Will you?" To which the woman responded, "Yes." Now, a lasting point of contention in the Chapman case is the time of death. According to Dr. Phillips, when he arrived at 6:30, Chapman had been dead for, quote, at least 2 hours. That would place her death at around 4:30. But according to Long, she saw Chapman alive a full hour later. Then there's the testimony of John Richardson. Richardson was the son of one of the tenants in the building. At 4:45, he made a routine checkup on the door to the basement, which had previously suffered a break-in. When he found it secure, he sat down on the backyard steps to trim a piece of leather from his boot. Even though he sat mere centimeters from the murder site, Richardson did not see a body. He was adamant on this point. "I could not have failed to notice the deceased if she had been there." To muddle the timeline even further, there's the testimony of Albert Kaddosh. About 20 minutes past 5, Kaddosh had gone through the backyard of 27 Hanbury Street when he heard voices coming from nearby. They were barely audible, however, and Kaddosh had only made out the word "no." A few minutes later, he heard something falling against the wooden fence dividing the 2 yards. There's no one way to untangle this web of contradictions, but Dr. Phillips did concede the possibility that he'd miscalculated. That, quote, the coldness of the morning and the great loss of blood had skewed his opinion, which was largely based on the warmth of the body. So, presuming that Dr. Phillips did miscalculate and the recollections of Long and Kaddosh were off by a few minutes, that would place Chapman's death at around 5:30 in the morning. By this point, the dim light of dawn would have provided the tenants of 29 Hanbury Street an unobstructed view of the murder site, some of whom had even slept with their windows open. In spite of this, the killer managed to evade detection and even made time to arrange the victim's possessions.